The wind was biting that morning, not sharp, not cruel, but steady, like something that didn't care whether you noticed it or not. It rolled off the empty hills, tugged at the rusting flagpole near the gas station, and stirred the scent of diesel and old coffee into the crisp air. Stan Hargrove didn't notice the dog at first. No one did. There was a man refueling his pickup, a young woman staring at her phone near the vending machine, someone inside buying jerky and aspirin, the usual stop-and-go rhythm of Highway 71. No reason to look twice at a slumped shape beneath the low shrubs near the dumpster. Stan had been counting quarters in the back room when he heard the low sound, not a bark, not a growl, something between a whine and a breath. He paused, his fingers hovering above the till. Outside, the wind chattered against the side door, a loose strip of metal ticking like a clock out of time. He should have ignored it, probably a possum, or that old stray with a blind eye that sometimes wandered in from the hills. But something in that sound sat wrong. Off-pitch, waited like it wasn't made for anyone to hear. Just slipped out by mistake. He stepped outside and squinted into the dull morning light. Dust spiraled from a passing semi. The trash bins rattled. The whine didn't repeat. Still, his eyes were drawn toward the thin patch of grass behind the dumpsters, near the edge of the lot where gravel met sagebrush. That's when he saw it. The shape was almost colorless against the dirt. A dog, curled tight, ribs rising too fast beneath patchy fur. But it wasn't the emaciation that hit Stan. It was the way the animal looked at him without lifting its head, as if it had already weighed him, as if it had already decided he wasn't the one. He approached slowly, keeping his footsteps light, though he wasn't sure why. The dog didn't move, didn't even flinch. Stan crouched a few feet away and studied the animal's body. Every bone showed. The paws were cracked, the tail twitching like a flicker of burnt wick. But the eyes, they were too alert for a dog that broke into clear. Not wild, not rabid, just tired. Old-souled, he thought, and felt foolish the moment it crossed his mind. He said nothing, just waited. The dog's breath wheezed through a thin, open mouth. One ear was torn. There was a fly crawling near the corner of its eye, and it didn't bother to blink. That's when Stan noticed the collar dot. It was leather, cracked, water-stained, with a single dull tag. But even in its weathered state, it was unmistakably deliberate. Someone had owned this dog recently. He leaned in, reaching carefully for the tag, when the dog shifted its weight almost imperceptibly. Not a threat, a hesitation. Stan paused. He murmured something he wouldn't remember what, just a low syllable, meant to calm, meant to ask permission. And the dog allowed it. Just a moment. Just enough for his fingers to brush the tag and turn it in the dim morning light. There was no name, no phone number, only one word, burned into the metal, barely legible under the grime. Return. Stan didn't understand. Was it a command, a label, a plea? Behind him, the chime above the station door jingled faintly. Someone left, an engine started. Life moved on, unaware, but Stan stayed crouched beside the dog, the wind rising a little, now pressing the smell of sage and something metallic into his nose. He looked at the dog again, whose gaze hadn't shifted. Not once, not to the door, the sound, or the sky, only him. He stood up slowly, backing away without turning, as if afraid that breaking eye contact would break something else. Inside, the coffee pot had gone cold. The till was still open, but Stan didn't return to his shift. Instead, he picked up the phone behind the counter and dialed Animal Services, not because he thought they'd know what to do, but because he didn't. They said someone would come by in 2 hours. He said the dog probably didn't have that long. The wind grew stronger. The clouds rolled low, a slate smear across the horizon. And somewhere beyond the low line of hills, a coyote howled. Once quick howl only, then went silent. No one else noticed the dog that morning. Not the family that stopped for gas. Not the trucker who bought cigarettes and left at 20. Not the teenage couple taking selfies by the pump. Only Stan. And by the time the officer arrived, the dog was gone. Just the collar remained still, warm, lying beside the flattened grass, where its ribs had pressed the earth. The collar was still warm. Stan didn't pick it up right away. He crouched, staring at it like it might still be connected to something just out of sight. A whisper of movement in the brush, a breath caught between wind gusts. But the flattened grass held no answers. Just a hollow where the dog had been, the shape of its weight still pressed into the dirt like memory. Above him, the sky was turning pale and dry, the sun pressing against the clouds without breaking through. It had the feel of a day that didn't want to start. The officer stood a few feet back, hands on his hips, squinting at the collar as though trying to guess its meaning. His uniform was neat, but his face showed too many years of calls that amounted to nothing, the kind of years that build a permanent shrug behind the eyes. He finally spoke, voice low and almost apologetic. "Are you sure it wasn't just a stray?" Stan didn't answer. He just reached out and lifted the collar, letting it dangle from one hand. It was heavier than it looked. The tag clinked once against the metal ring, then settled. "Never seen a stray vanish like that," he said. "Not that fast." The officer scratched his chin. "Coyote, maybe." Stan looked at the line of scrub along the lot's edge. Nothing moved. The wind had calmed, but the quiet that followed wasn't peace. It felt like a held breath. no tracks, Stan said, and left it at that. The officer didn't push. He took a few photos with his phone, more out of protocol than curiosity, and handed Stan a standard report slip if it comes back, or if you see anything else. You got my number. Stan nodded. The officer left. The station felt hollow after that. Customers came and went. The pumps beeped. The ice machine rattled like a slow metronome, but everything felt slightly out of time. Stan kept the collar beneath the counter, wrapped in an old towel, unable to bring himself to throw it out or lock it away. Every hour or so, he glanced toward the dumpsters, half expecting to see those eyes again, calm, watchful. Deciding, that night, he left the back door propped open. Just a few inches, he didn't tell himself why. The wind had died completely by dusk, and the silence stretched deep. It wasn't until nearly midnight that he heard it. Not a sound, exactly, but a shift, like pressure moving through air. The hairs on his arms rose before his mind caught up. He stepped quietly into the lot, flashlight in hand, heart ticking with the slow insistence of something half remembered. The flashlight beam sliced across the bins, then into the brush. Nothing. Then it caught barely a reflection, not eyes. Metal. Stan moved forward, slow and deliberate. The beam flicked, then landed on a shape partly hidden in the tall grass. Not the dog. A small, dented tin box, half buried. No reason it should be there. He hesitated, then bent to pick it up. The lid was stiff, rusted at the edges. He worked it loose and opened it. Inside there were two things: a photograph, faded and bent, showing a young girl in a red jacket crouched beside a dog. Not the same dog, but similar to similar. The same pale fur, the same eyes. The collar was newer then, clearly legible. Return. And below the photo, a key, plain old-fashioned, brass-worn smooth. Stan stared at it for a long time. The wind had picked up again, soft and restless. The kind that slips between boards, that knows how to move through places you thought sealed. Something about the photo, about the girl's posture. The way she leaned into the dog, as though confiding something, lodged itself in his throat. He thought of his daughter. Grown now, distant, more voicemail than voice. He hadn't seen her in 6 years. Maybe 7. He closed the box and carried it inside. That night, he didn't sleep. He left the back door open again, this time fully. He brewed coffee he didn't drink, and he kept the collar on the counter. The tag turned outward. By dawn, something in him had shifted. Not clarity, nothing like that, just an ache. A question. He took the key from the tin and weighed it in his palm. There were no markings, no numbers, no lock. It obviously belonged to, but he knew he wouldn't throw it away. And he knew he wouldn't wait much longer either. Before opening the station, he walked the edge of the lot one last time. The air had changed, heavier, holding a scent he couldn't name. Not animal, not entirely. There were tracks now, just faint impressions in the soil where dew hadn't settled. Paw prints heading west, not in a panic, not chased, just ... going somewhere. As the sun rose, a long slow light spilled over the highway. It touched the collar, the key, and the photo, all laid out on the counter. Stan stood at the window, watching the road, waiting. The road shimmered faintly beneath the rising sun, not from heat, but from the kind of light that made everything look older than it was. Stan watched it in silence, the collar resting beside the photo and the key on the counter. No customers yet, no traffic. Just the slow awakening of a forgotten part of the country, where time leaked sideways and the land kept its own counsel. He didn't know why he was waiting. He only knew that movement felt wrong. Even the rattle of the cooler motor seemed too loud, too mechanical. The photo's edges fluttered under the draft from the ceiling vent. But the girl in red kept smiling, crouched forever beside the dog, with the same stillness the creature had shown behind the dumpster. The key sat between them like a question that wouldn't word itself. Stan found himself standing in the doorway again, arms folded, boots on the first 2 steps that led into the lot. The paw prints had faded under the morning dew, just depressions, now suggestions, still heading west. He didn't need to follow them. He already knew where they pointed, out past the service road, beyond the rise of dry brush and shallow gullies. The hills folded in quiet arcs. No houses, no trails. Just scrub, loose, shale, and silence. And somewhere beyond that, the Dead Motel. It hadn't been called that officially, of course. Sleepy Pine's motor in the faded sign had read when it still stood. But everyone in the county had called it the Dead Motel since the fire 20 years back. Maybe more. The place had never been rebuilt, just left to rot, its bones picked apart by wind, weather, and time. Only the back wing still stood, mostly intact, but dangerous to enter, and useless. No plumbing, no power, no reason to be there unless you were hiding something, or protecting it. Stan didn't pack anything. No bag, no lunch, just a flashlight, the collar and the key tucked into his jacket pocket like a coin he didn't want to spend. He locked the station, posted a paper sign on the glass, back in 1 hour. It was a lie, and he knew it. The walk took longer than he remembered. The terrain hadn't changed. It was still rough, crumbling underfoot, studded with yucca and scattered bones of old jackrabbits, but Stan had the weight in his knees, the shortness in his breath, all reminders of time past and things not kept up with. He stopped once at the top of a shallow ridge and looked back. The gas station was a dull smudge in the distance, barely distinct from the land itself. When he reached the outer fence of the motel, the sky had deepened to that particular blue that only happens in dry air, vivid and empty. The building stood like a carcass, sun-bleached and hollow, windows gaping. Stan stepped through the break in the fence without thinking, without hesitation. His feet moved like they knew the way. Inside the remains of the lobby, charred beams leaned inward, and the floor was warped under layers of blown-in sand and ash. But someone had been there recently. He could see the tracks, booted and light, in the dust, and smaller ones beside them. Pads, claws, not random, not wandering, a pattern back and forth, as if keeping watch. Stan followed the trail past the remnants of the vending alcove and into the long hallway where the guest rooms used to be. The walls had peeled in long strips like bark from a dead tree. Room 14's door hung askew. Room 15 had collapsed entirely. Room 16 still had its hinges. He stopped there, not because of the key, he hadn't tried it yet, but because of the smell. Not rot, not animal, something older, familiar, but not recent. The scent of warm wood, of old fabric, of something that should have burned long ago but hadn't. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the key, and tested the knob. It resisted at first, then clicked. The door creaked open, and light spilled into a space that shouldn't have been so whole. The room inside was intact. Dust everywhere, thick and unbroken, but the furniture stood upright. A bed, a dresser, a mirror to clean for its surroundings. On the bed was a blanket, and on that blanket shaped the dog lay curled again, exactly as it had behind the dumpster. But this time it didn't lift its head. Its breathing was faint, shallow, barely visible beneath its ribs. Stan stepped inside. The air was different here, not musty, not stale. Still, he crouched beside the bed. The collar in his hand trembled slightly. Or maybe that was just him. He didn't speak, didn't reach out. The dog opened its eyes slowly, not startled, just aware, acknowledging, and then he heard it a second. Breath. Not the dog's. It came from behind the bathroom door, soft, steady, human. He turned his head slowly and felt something cold move through his chest. Not fear, not yet, but something that made time slow down. That dog didn't move, neither did Stan. The silence pressed in like snowfall. The breath behind the door was too steady to be imagined. It didn't hitch, it didn't pause. It was the kind of breath you only noticed because everything else had gone silent. Stan didn't call out. Something in the stillness told him not to. The way the dog remained motionless on the bed, eyes open but unreadable, not alarmed, not at ease, watching, the way it had watched him from the edge of the station lot, with that same calm, heavy gaze that made it impossible to lie to yourself. The room was thick with dust, but the path from the bathroom door to the bed was clean. No footprints, no smears, just absence, like someone had floated across it without ever touching down. Stan rose slowly, every joint stiff, not with fear but something colder, that old, knotted instinct that only settles in your bones after too many years of burying what you can't change. He stepped once toward the door and stopped. The breath inside the bathroom stopped. Then a rustle, a soft scraping like fingers shifting across porcelain. His voice came out low. Tired, I'm not here to take anything. No reply. Only the creak of the old floor behind him as the dog shifted slightly, just enough to let him know it was still watching. The silence inside the bathroom lengthened, turning sharp. Then, faintly, a voice answered. She didn't mean to leave him. A woman's voice, quiet, flat, no panic, just a worn-out truth spoken like a habit. Stan didn't move. The voice came again, slower this time. She thought the fire would take them both. She waited for it. The door creaked inward, not pushed but opened by the sag of the building, enough to show the outline of a figure seated on the old tile floor. A woman, small, hair matted in places, wrapped in a jacket too, big for her frame. Her eyes were wide but not wild, just hollow, like she'd been staring at something inside herself for too long. Stan took one step in and stopped in the doorway. She didn't flinch. He didn't ask who she was. He knew better. You don't ask a broken thing to explain its shape. She looked past him, toward the bed. He came back here because it was the only place that didn't lie. Stan's voice felt thick. The dog. She nodded. He waited, even after she was gone. Something about the way she said it, not if, not when, told him she wasn't speaking of someone distant. And still, she hadn't moved toward him or away. She stayed anchored to the floor like it was the only thing that could hold her. Stan lowered himself into a crouch. Not close, not imposing. He didn't want to spook the moment. The room was stale, but not dead. There was something living here. Grief, maybe, or a tether to something that hadn't unraveled yet. The woman's eyes met his then, sudden and clean. He brought the collar back. Stan didn't answer. He didn't know how she knew, but she did. She pressed her hands to the floor, as if grounding herself. They used to stay here, she and the girl, before the motel burned every summer. The dog was just a pup back then. The memory hung between them, dry and half-formed. She went looking when it happened. but by the time they pulled her from the wreckage, the girl was already gone. The dog, too. No one thought anything survived. Stan found himself whispering, but it did. The woman looked away, toward the corner of the bathroom. Her voice cracked, not from emotion, but disuse. She left food here for months. Came back when the snow cleared. Kept thinking maybe he'd remember. Dogs remember. Stan stared down at the cracked tile. A trail of paw prints was faintly visible in the dust near the threshold, as if the dog had passed in and out of this room more than once, keeping vigil, carrying something back and forth. She couldn't live knowing, the woman said, so she stopped. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. Stan rose slowly and stepped back into the bedroom. The dog was sitting up now. Barely, but enough to look at the bathroom door and let out a quiet, strained breath. Not a whine, not a bark, just sound, the kind of sound that exists only for those who've been waiting too long. Stan knelt beside it, the collar still in his hand. The tag glinted once in the light filtering through the broken blinds. "Return," he murmured again. He looked at the dog, then the woman, and finally at the hallway outside. The motel was crumbling. The world had forgotten it, but something had drawn the pieces back here. He reached out and gently set the collar beside the dog's paws. The animal didn't move, but its eyes softened. Then, somewhere in the building, distant, almost ghostly, a door slammed. Not wind, no breeze had moved. Stan looked up sharply, but the woman in the bathroom remained still, her head lowered. The dog turned toward the hallway, ears twitching. And then a new sound. Small, deliberate. A second set of footsteps, light and uneven, moving slowly down the far end of the ruined corridor. The footsteps continued, soft, slow, uneven, like a memory, learning how to walk again. Stan stayed still. The dog did too, ears pricked, gaze fixed on the dark gap at the far end of the corridor. The air in the room felt thin, as if holding its breath. No one moved, not even the woman in the bathroom. Then, out of the shadowed hallway, a figure emerged. She was no older than 10, barefoot, pale in the dusty light. Her red jacket faded to rose and hanging loose around narrow shoulders. Her hair was tangled, her face unreadable, not scared, not expectant, just present, utterly, quietly there. Stan felt the moment like a weight pressing through the floorboards. The girl's eyes swept the room and settled on the dog. And the dog rose, not all the way. Its hind legs shook. Its spine arched too sharply, but it stood, and something in its body, something that had been held tight for far too long, uncoiled. The girl took one step forward. The dog moved off the bed and limped toward her. No one else made a sound. The woman in the bathroom let out a breath that cracked as it left her chest. A sound too complex to name. Grief. Surrender. Maybe the first thread of forgiveness. The dog reached the girl and pressed its head against her hand. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just lowered herself to the floor beside it, arms sliding around its neck with a motion so practiced, so gentle, it could only have been remembered. The collar lay forgotten near the bed. Outside, a crow called once from the rusted roofline, then took flight, its wings breaking the morning. Silence like old glass. Stan backed toward the doorway, not sure what he was leaving behind, only that he shouldn't stay. Some reunions weren't meant for witnesses. He stepped into the hall and passed the broken rooms one by one. As he reached the threshold of the outer lobby, a shaft of light touched the dust just right, and for a moment, he saw it all as it had once been: the carpet whole, the front desk tidy, a bell on the counter, a girl in a red jacket laughing as a dog tried to drink from a soda cup in her hand. Then it was gone. He didn't speak to the woman when he passed the bathroom. She didn't lift her head, but he knew she'd felt him go. Whatever had kept her anchored to this place had begun to loosen. That was enough. Back outside, the air was warmer. The wind had changed, softer now, less restless. Stan walked the path in silence. The motel behind him grew smaller with every step, its shadow finally separating from his dot. By the time he reached the station, the sun had climbed above the ridge. A truck idled at pump 3. The family was inside the store, choosing snacks. Ordinary life, as if nothing had happened. Stan slipped behind the counter, placed the collar back in its towel, and set it inside the drawer. Then he turned the back in 1 hour sign to open. He didn't explain where he'd been. He just handed a man his change and offered a nod. Later that evening, after closing, he stood by the window again. The light had turned golden, and long shadows crept across the lot. He could still see the faint prints at the edge of the scrub, softened by the day. The photo from the tin box lay on the counter beside him, the girl in the red jacket, the young dog leaning into her. The moment frozen in grainy stillness. He studied it for a while, then tucked it into the small bulletin frame above the register, between a fire evacuation chart and a faded photo of a rattlesnake caught in the men's restroom in 9-3. It looked right there, quiet, UNDEMANDING. As the sun dipped behind the hills, a final wind moved through the lot, warm and almost kind, carrying with it the scent of sage and something deeper, out beyond the fence. Somewhere in the growing dark, a dog's howl rose once, clean and full, and then faded. Stan watched the last light gather across the asphalt, catching for a moment on a single worn paw print near the edge of the road, the print already softening in the dusk. He didn't move to preserve it. Some things were meant to fade.